His studio lights glowed with a polished warmth that made everything look perfect. The set was designed to feel casual and inviting, with soft leather chairs, a small glass table, and an audience seated close enough to feel involved. Producers moved quietly behind cameras while assistants checked microphones and cue cards. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's episode was special. Two of Hollywood's biggest stars were scheduled to appear together, Will Smith and Keanu Reeves. The host, Marcus Hale, had spent the entire week promoting the event. Social media was flooded with clips from both actors' careers, and entertainment outlets predicted that the chemistry between them would create unforgettable television. Marcus himself expected a lively conversation filled with humor, stories from movie sets, and friendly banter. What no one expected was that a single question would change the entire mood of the night. A surprising contrast will arrive first. Energetic as always, he greeted crew members by name, joked with camera operators, and waved enthusiastically to the audience during rehearsal. The crowd responded with cheers. Will knew how to command a room, and he did it effortlessly. Keanu arrived a few minutes later. There was no dramatic entrance. He simply walked onto the set carrying a small paper cup of coffee. He shook hands with the crew, thanked the stage manager for having him, and took his seat quietly. A few audience members recognized him immediately and applauded. Keanu smiled politely and nodded. The contrast between the two men was striking. Will radiated extroverted confidence. Keanu carried himself with calm restraint. Yet both seemed comfortable, and the host sensed the audience was eager to see how their personalities would interact. The conversation began and the show went live. Marcus opened with enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have two incredible guests. Please welcome Will Smith and Keanu Reeves. The audience erupted in applause. The first segment went smoothly. Will told a funny story about forgetting a line during an action scene. Keanu shared a humorous memory about learning motorcycle stunts. They laughed together, and the audience relaxed. Marcus then shifted toward a discussion about success and public image. Both of you have had long careers, Marcus said. People admire not only your work, but also the way you've handled fame. What has been the biggest challenge? Will answered first. For me, it's learning that people don't really know you. They know the version they see on screen. Balancing that can be difficult. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. I think the challenge is staying connected to ordinary life. Fame can create distance if you let it. I try not to let it. Marcus smiled. That leads perfectly into something viewers often say about you. Keanu, people constantly share stories about your kindness. Why do you think those stories resonate so much? Before Keanu could answer, Will leaned back in his chair and laughed lightly. Because kindness is good marketing. The audience chuckled uncertainly. Marcus glanced at Keanu, expecting a playful response. Instead, Keanu remained calm. Will continued, still smiling. Come on, let's be honest. Hollywood loves a nice guy image. Every actor knows that. Some people work harder on the image than the acting. A few audience members laughed, but the mood shifted. The comment landed differently than the earlier jokes. Marcus sensed the tension immediately. The room grows quiet. Marcus attempted to steer the conversation back toward humor. Well, I'm sure there's more to it than that. Will shrugged casually. I'm just saying people love stories. You help someone once, and suddenly the internet turns you into a saint. For the first time all evening, the audience felt completely silent. Marcus turned to Keanu. Would you like to respond? Keanu rested his coffee cup on the table. His expression remained relaxed, but his voice carried a sincerity that immediately changed the atmosphere. I don't think kindness should be a performance. The room stayed quiet. If someone is struggling and you can help, you help. Not because cameras are watching. Not because people will talk about it. Because that's what human beings are supposed to do for each other. Several audience members began to applaud softly. Will smiled, though the confidence in his expression had faded slightly. Sure, but public perception matters. Everybody manages it. Keanu nodded. Public perception changes every day. A good headline becomes a bad headline. A trend becomes another trend. The only thing that lasts is how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from it. The applause grew louder. An unexpected story. Marcus, sensing the audience's attention, leaned forward. Can you give an example of what you mean? Keanu thought for a moment. Years ago, before I was well known, I was stuck at a bus station late at night. I didn't have much money, and I was worried about getting home. A stranger noticed and bought me a meal. He didn't know my name. He didn't expect anything in return. I never forgot that. The audience listened closely. That experience taught me something important. Small acts can stay with a person for decades. Most kindness is invisible. It happens without publicity, without credit, and often without anyone remembering who did it. But the person who receives it remembers. The studio was completely still. Will looked at Keanu. Then down at the table, Marcus could see that the conversation had moved beyond entertainment. The producers concentrated behind the cameras. Producers exchanged nervous glances. Live television was unpredictable, and the tension between the guests had become impossible to ignore. One producer whispered that they should cut to commercial early. Marcus received the instruction through his earpiece. He hesitated. Something about the moment felt genuine, and interrupting it seemed wrong. Instead, he asked one more question. Do you think people can become this cynical about kindness? Keanu answered immediately. I think cynicism is often disappointment wearing armor. People get hurt, so they stop believing good intentions exist. But if we assume every kind act is fake, we make the world colder than it already is. The audience applauded again, this time more strongly. A different kind of silence will remain quiet for several seconds. The camera stayed on him, and viewers could see that he was thinking carefully about his response. Finally, he spoke. You know, I didn't mean that kindness isn't real. I've seen a lot of it in my life. Maybe I was talking more about how public figures get judged. Keanu nodded respectfully. That's fair. Being in the public eye is complicated, but I think we have an opportunity to make things a little better. Even small interactions matter. The tension eased slightly. Marcus smiled, relieved that the conversation had become constructive rather than confrontational. After the commercial break during the break, crew members moved around the set, adjusting lights and microphones. Audience members whispered excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Dad would lean toward Keanu. I hope I didn't come off as disrespectful. Keanu shook his head. We're just having a conversation. Will smiled. Appreciatively, you handled it well. Keanu chuckled. Softly, I've had practice staying calm. Both men laughed, and the atmosphere behind the scenes became noticeably lighter. The audience reaction when the show resumed. The conversation shifted to upcoming projects, filmmaking, and personal interests. The earlier tension was never directly revisited, yet the audience remained focused on Keanu's words. After the taping ended, people stood in line outside the studio discussing the exchange. Many said they expected a celebrity argument, and instead witnessed a thoughtful conversation about character and empathy. Clips from the interview spread quickly online. Viewers quoted Keanu's statement, "The only thing that lasts is how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from it." The phrase appeared across social media, accompanied by stories of teachers, nurses, neighbors, and strangers who had shown kindness without recognition. Commentators noted that Keanu never attacked Will personally. He disagreed without humiliating him. That, many people argued, was what made his response powerful. A Lesson Beyond Hollywood interview became popular not because of celebrity drama, but because it reminded viewers of something easy to forget. In a world obsessed with visibility, likes, and headlines, genuine kindness often happens quietly. It rarely trends. It rarely makes the news. Yet those small moments can shape lives. For Marcus Hale, the host, the night became one of the most memorable episodes of his career. Years later, he would say that the silence after Keanu's response taught him more than any applause ever had. For Will, the conversation sparked reflection about how public figures influence audiences. For Keanu, it was simply another reminder that empathy matters most when it isn't performed. And for millions of viewers, the lesson was surprisingly simple. You don't have to win an argument to make an impact. Sometimes the strongest response is. The morning after the interview, the internet was flooded with reactions. Television analysts replayed clips from the conversation. Bloggers wrote articles about communication, humility, and emotional intelligence. Social media users debated every word spoken on stage. Some focused on the tension, while others focused on the message. Yet among all the headlines, one thing became clear. People were not talking about conflict. They were talking about character. Across different countries, thousands of viewers shared personal stories inspired by Keanu's comments about kindness. Teachers spoke about students who had quietly helped classmates. Nurses shared experiences of patients comforting other patients. Small business owners described customers who returned years later simply to say, "Thank you." The conversation had become much bigger than a television show. And neither Keanu nor Will expected what would happen next. A call from an old friend. Days after the interview, Keanu sat on the balcony of his home, enjoying a peaceful morning. His phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name he had not seen in years. Daniel Mercer. Keanu smiled. Daniel had known him long before fame, before movie premieres, before red carpets and interviews. They had shared small apartments, uncertain careers, and countless late-night conversations about dreams and disappointments. Keanu answered immediately. Daniel, a familiar laugh came through the phone. Still answering your own calls? Most of the time. Good, Daniel replied. Because I wanted to tell you something. What is it? There was a pause. I watched the interview. Keanu laughed softly. I figured you might. No, listen carefully. Daniel's voice became serious. That story you told about the stranger buying you dinner years ago. Yes, I think I know who that stranger was. Keanu sat upright. For a moment he thought Daniel was joking. What do you mean? Daniel explained. Years ago, when they were struggling actors, a man named Thomas regularly visited the same bus station. Thomas worked night shifts and often helped travelers who looked lost or hungry. Daniel remembered seeing him many times. The description matched perfectly. Keanu became silent. More than 20 years had passed. He had never learned the man's name, never had the opportunity to thank him. Yet now, for the first time, there was a possibility. The search begins a week later. Keanu found himself traveling to the small city where the bus station still stood. He told almost no one. No cameras. No public announcement. No media coverage. Just a quiet journey. Driven by curiosity and gratitude, the station looked different now. Modern signs had replaced old ones. The waiting area had been renovated. New businesses surrounded the neighborhood, yet certain details remained familiar. The same corner bench, the same street crossing, the same view of distant buildings. Standing there felt like opening a time capsule. A station employee noticed him. Can I help you? Keanu smiled. Maybe. He explained that he was searching for someone who might have worked nearby many years ago. The employee listened carefully. Then his eyes widened. You might want to speak with Mrs. Patterson. Who's that? She owned the coffee shop across the street for almost 30 years. Memories of an ordinary Harrimer's. Patterson was 73 years old. Her small cafe smelled of fresh bread and coffee. When Keanu entered, she recognized him immediately, but instead of reacting to his celebrity status, she seemed more interested in his question. You said you're looking for Thomas? Keanu nodded. Her face softened. Oh my, you remember him? Of course I remember him. She smiled warmly. Everyone remembers Thomas. For the next hour, she shared stories. Thomas had never been wealthy. He worked long hours. His clothes were simple. His apartment was small, yet he spent much of his life helping strangers. He paid for meals. He offered rides. He listened to people who needed someone to talk to. Sometimes he sat with homeless individuals simply because they seemed lonely. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. He never thought he was doing anything special. Keanu listened carefully. The more he heard, the more amazed he became. Thomas had changed countless lives without seeking recognition. No awards, no interviews. No headlines. Just quiet acts of kindness repeated over decades. Meanwhile, across the country, while Keanu searched for answers, Will Smith found himself thinking about the interview more than he expected. At first he brushed it off. After all, celebrities experience public debates constantly, but this felt different. Something about Keanu's response lingered in his mind, not because it embarrassed him, because it challenged him. One evening, Will sat with his longtime manager, Marcus Carter. You've been unusually quiet lately, Marcus observed. Will laughed. Have I? Definitely. Will stared out the window. You ever have one conversation that keeps replaying in your head? Marcus nodded. All the time. That interview. He paused. I realized something. What? Will leaned back. I spend so much time thinking about influence. Marcus listened. Will continued. Big projects, big audiences, big accomplishments, and maybe I've underestimated small things. Marcus smiled. What brought that on? Will shook his head. A sentence. The one about treating people well when there's nothing to gain. Will nodded. Double quotes exactly. Double quotes the unexpected discovery several days later. Keanu finally received news. Thomas was alive. 81 years old. Retired, living quietly in a nearby town. Keanu felt an unexpected wave of emotion. For decades, Thomas had existed only as a memory. Now he was real again, a living person. A chance to express gratitude that had waited 20 years. Mrs. Patterson arranged a meeting. The following afternoon, Keanu drove to a modest neighborhood lined with trees and small houses. Nothing about the area suggested wealth or fame. It felt peaceful. Authentic. Human. When he reached the address, he paused for a moment. Then knocked. The door opened slowly. An elderly man appeared, gray hair, gentle eyes, a warm expression. Keanu immediately recognized him. Not from facial features, from kindness. Some people carry it visibly. Thomas was one of them. Conversation 20 years later. Thomas looked puzzled. "Can I help you?" Keanu smiled. "I hope so." The elderly man stared for a moment. Then recognition appeared. "Wait." His eyes widened. "You're..." Keanu laughed. "Yes." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Keanu took a breath. "I came to say thank you." The old man looked confused. "For what?" Keanu explained the bus station story, the meal. The conversation. The encouragement, the kindness shown to a struggling young man. Thomas listened carefully, then smiled. "Oh, that's it?" Thomas laughed. "I bought a lot of people meals." For several seconds, neither man spoke, then both burst into laughter. The wisdom of Thomas. They spent hours talking. No reporters. No cameras. No audience. Just the people sharing memories. At one point, Keanu asked a question. "Why did you do it?" Thomas tilted his head. "What? Help strangers." The old man thought for a moment. Then answered, "Because life is hard." The simplicity of the response surprised him. Thomas continued, "Everyone carries something. Invisible, pain, fear, loneliness, loss. You usually can't see it." He looked out the window. "What is there?" Keanu remained silent. Thomas smiled. "If someone crosses your path and you can make their day a little lighter, why wouldn't you?" The words stayed with him, not because they were complicated, because they were true. A different kind of legacy. Before leaving, Keanu asked another question. "Do you know how many people you've helped?" Thomas laughed. "Not even close. Doesn't that bother you?" "No." "Why not?" The old man pointed toward a tree outside. "Do you count how many people enjoy shade from a tree?" Keanu smiled. Thomas continued, "The tree doesn't. It just grows." The room fell silent. For Keanu, it was one of the most profound lessons he had ever heard. Real impact rarely measures itself. Real generosity doesn't keep score. A new idea that evening, while driving back home, Keanu reflected on everything he had learned. The television interview, the public reaction. Thomas. The countless unseen acts of kindness happening every day. An idea began forming. Not a movie, not a publicity campaign. Something different, something meaningful. He wanted to create a project that highlighted ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Not celebrities. Not influencers. Not public figures. Regular individuals, quietly improving the lives of others. People like Thomas. The world needed more of those stories. An unexpected invitation 3 weeks later. Will received a message. The sender surprised him. Keanu Reeves. The message was simple. "I'd like to show you something." No cameras, no press, just a conversation. Will smiled. His curiosity immediately took over. He replied, "I'm interested." A meeting was arranged. Neither man knew it yet, but that conversation would lead them toward a project capable of inspiring millions, and it would begin with the story of an elderly stranger whose simple act of kindness decades earlier had changed a young man's life forever. The message from Keanu had remained in Will's mind for days. It was short, simple, almost mysterious. I'd like to show you something. No cameras, no press, just a conversation. Most invitations in Hollywood came with contracts, publicity plans, sponsors, or strategic goals. This one came with none of those things, and that alone made it interesting. 2 weeks later, Will arrived at a small community center located outside the city. There were no photographers, no reporters, no red carpet, just a modest brick building surrounded by trees. As he stepped inside, he immediately spotted Keanu speaking with several volunteers. The volunteers weren't actors. They weren't influencers. Most people would never recognize them. Yet every face carried a quiet sense of purpose. Keanu noticed Will and smiled. "Glad you came." Will shook his hand. "You've definitely got my attention." Keanu laughed. "Good, because I want to introduce you to some remarkable people." The room full of heroes inside the community center. About 50 people sat around tables drinking coffee and sharing stories. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but as Keanu introduced them one by one, Will realized he was surrounded by extraordinary individuals. A retired teacher who had spent 15 years buying school supplies for children whose families couldn't afford them. A mechanic who repaired vehicles for struggling single parents free of charge. A librarian who created reading programs for children in underserved neighborhoods. A former nurse who spent every weekend visiting elderly residents who had no family nearby. None of them had become famous. None of them expected recognition. Most were surprised anyone cared about their stories. Well, listen carefully. The more he heard, the more humbled he became. The project later that afternoon, Keanu explained why he had invited him. After the interview, Keanu said, "People kept talking about kindness." Will nodded. "I noticed, but something bothered me." "What?" Keanu leaned forward. "The people receiving attention weren't the people who deserved it most." Well, listen. Keanu continued. "There are millions of ordinary people making the world better every day, yet nobody hears about them. So I started thinking, what if we changed that?" Will smiled. "And that's why we're here." Keanu nodded. "I want to create something that tells their stories. Not celebrities, not politicians, not public figures, regular people." Will looked around the room again. For the first time, he understood exactly what Keanu meant. The world constantly celebrated fame, but fame and impact weren't always the same thing. Many of the people sitting in that room had positively influenced hundreds of lives. Yet almost nobody knew their names. The beginning of something bigger within weeks. The idea grew into a national project called the Ripple Effect. The concept was simple. People could nominate someone who had quietly improved the lives of others. Teachers, volunteers, neighbors, caregivers, community leaders, anyone whose kindness created positive change. The goal wasn't to reward wealth or achievement. The goal was to recognize character. The response exceeded every expectation. Thousands of nominations arrived, then tens of thousands. Stories poured in from every corner of the country. Stories about compassion, sacrifice, perseverance, generosity, and hope. Each submission revealed something powerful. Kindness was far more common than people believed. It simply wasn't receiving attention. The story that stood out among all the nominations, one story captured everyone's heart. It came from multiple people, different cities, different generations, different backgrounds, yet every nomination mentioned the same name: Thomas, the elderly man who had helped strangers at a bus station decades earlier. Many people shared nearly identical experiences: a free meal during a difficult day, encouraging words during a personal crisis, a ride home after being stranded. Support during moments of loneliness. The stories stretched across 40 years. No one had coordinated them. They simply existed. Proof of a lifetime spent helping others. When the project team reviewed the submissions, several volunteers became emotional. One volunteer wiped away tears. "How many lives has this man touched?" Nobody knew. And that made the story even more remarkable. The secret plan: Keanu knew Thomas would never agree to public recognition. The old man disliked attention. He preferred helping quietly. So the team designed something different. Instead of celebrating Thomas directly, they organized a community gathering focused on kindness. Thomas was invited under the impression that he would simply attend as a guest. He accepted without suspicion. Months of preparation followed. People traveled from different states. Some drove for hours. Others flew across the country. Many had never met one another, yet they shared one thing in common: Years earlier, Thomas had helped them. And now they wanted to thank him. The day a Reeves event took place inside a large theater. The atmosphere felt warm rather than glamorous. Families filled the seats. Teachers sat beside students. Doctors sat beside mechanics. Young children sat beside grandparents. The audience represented every background imaginable. Before the program began, Thomas entered quietly. He looked around with curiosity. I didn't realize this many people were coming. Keanu smiled. Neither did I. Thomas laughed. Something about the response felt suspicious, but he couldn't figure out why. Stories from the audience of the program began with ordinary people sharing stories about kindness. A firefighter described being inspired by a neighbor who volunteered every weekend. A student spoke about a teacher who changed her life. A father described strangers who helped his family during difficult times. The audience applauded repeatedly. The atmosphere became increasingly emotional. Then the lights dimmed. A large screen appeared behind the stage. Keanu walked to the center. The room grew quiet. The first video, a woman appeared on screen. She looked to be in her 50s. She smiled nervously. 30 years ago, I was struggling. I had lost my job. I had nowhere to go. I was sitting alone at a bus station. The audience listened. A man bought me dinner. He spent 20 minutes talking with me. He reminded me that difficult seasons eventually pass. Her voice trembled. I never forgot him. The screen faded. Another person appeared. Then another. Then another. Story after story. Different years. Different circumstances. Different lives. Yet every story featured the same individual. Thomas. Realization at first. Thomas seemed confused. Then recognition slowly appeared on his face. His eyes widened. His expression changed. The audience watched silently as he realized what was happening. Every story connected back to him. Every life touched by his kindness had become part of a much larger story. Tears began forming in his eyes. Beside him, Keanu remained quiet. This moment belonged entirely to Thomas. The standing ovation after the final video ended. Keanu stepped forward. Thomas. The elderly man looked up. You once told me something. The audience listened carefully. Keanu smiled. You said life is hard. Thomas nodded. You also said if we can make someone's day lighter, we should. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Keanu continued, for 40 years. You did exactly that. He gestured toward the audience. And these people are part of your legacy. One by one, audience members began standing. Then entire rows, then entire sections. Within moments, every person in the theater was on their feet. A standing ovation. Not for fame. Not for money. Not for celebrity. For kindness. Pure and simple. The applause continued for several minutes. Thomas sat quietly, overwhelmed. The moment no one expected. When the applause finally settled, Thomas slowly walked to the stage. The audience remained standing. He looked around the room, then smiled. You know something funny? Everyone listened. I thought I was coming here for free coffee. The audience burst into laughter. The tension eased. Then his expression became serious. I don't know what to say. He paused. I never expected any of this. His voice trembled. I wasn't trying to change lives. He looked toward the audience. I was just trying to help people through difficult days. A silence filled the room. The kind of silence created when truth speaks louder than applause. The final lesson Thomas continued. When I was young, I believed changing the world required extraordinary things. He shook his head. I was wrong. The audience listened carefully. Most change happens through ordinary moments. A conversation, a kind word, a meal, a ride, a listening ear. He smiled. The world changes one person at a time. Many audience members wiped away tears. Even Will found himself emotional. What happened next? Ripple Effect project became a movement. More communities joined. More stories were shared. More unsung heroes were recognized. Schools adopted kindness programs. Volunteer organizations expanded. Neighborhood groups formed. Thousands of people decided to become more intentional about helping others. Not because they expected recognition, because they had been reminded that every action matters. A private conversation after the event ended. Will and Keanu sat backstage. The theater had mostly emptied. Volunteers packed equipment. Families headed home. Yet both men remained thoughtful. Finally, what broke the silence? You were right. Keanu smiled. About what? The interview. Keanu looked confused. Will continued. The most important things usually happen when nobody's watching. For a moment neither man spoke. Then Keanu laughed. Softly. Took you long enough. Will laughed. Too. Fair. The legacy years later. People would remember the ripple effect. Some would remember the stories. Others would remember the emotional gathering. Many would remember Thomas. But the most important lesson wasn't attached to any single person. It was attached to an idea, a simple truth. One act of kindness may seem small. One encouraging conversation may seem insignificant. One moment of compassion may feel invisible. Yet those moments create ripples. And ripples travel farther than anyone realizes. A stranger buys a meal. A life changes. That life influences another, and another. And another. Until the impact becomes impossible to measure. Just like a tree never counts how many people enjoy its shade, the people who change the world most profoundly often never know the full extent of their influence. Final message. Television interview that began with tension ultimately revealed something far more meaningful. Strength is not found in winning arguments. Wisdom is not found in humiliating others. And true influence is not measured by fame. It is measured by the lives we touch, because long after awards are forgotten, careers end, and headlines disappear, one thing remains: how we treated people when we had the opportunity to make their lives a little brighter. And sometimes that is the greatest legacy of all.